My first job was back in the early part of the Depression. My mother and I raised a big garden, and we had a fence down the middle, chickens on one side, garden on the other, and then we would swap it. We would harvest after the harvest. We'd move the chickens over to where the garden was, and then we'd plant the garden back over where the chicken was, and we didn't have to buy fertilizer. And we raised just about everything that we ate, except staples, you know. And so I had a little red wagon, and we would raise turnip greens and collard greens and carrots for sale. And I'd take my little wagon when I was 6, and I'd go around to the neighborhood that we lived in and sell them to the neighbors. And my mother got sell them for 10 cents, and my mother got a nickel, and I got a nickel. And that was my first job.
You and Mom a 50-50 partnership, huh?
We were 50-50 partnerships. And then we had a push mower, lawnmower, you know, the old rotor type push mower lawnmower. And so I had a regular job with different neighbors, older neighbors there, mowing their yards and taking care of their yards. And I did that all the way up until I went in the 7th grade. But before that, I worked at the grocery store, which was down on the corner about a quarter of a mile from where we lived. And we had to sack everything back in those days. It'd come in 100-pound bags, and we'd have to sack it all and put it in 2-pound, 3-pound, 5-pound bags and stuff. And we did that during the week and on Sunday. But on Saturday, Friday evening and Saturday, I cleaned chickens, because our chickens come in big chicken coops, and they'd stack them up there, you know. And I had a 55-gallon drum and a wood fire underneath it and water it, and the people would come and pick out the chicken they wanted, and I'd kill it and clean it for them while they were shopping in the grocery store there in the neighborhood. And then during the week, during school time, just not quite a half a mile away was a restaurant there that belonged to an engineer for the railroad and his wife, the Reedy family. And on the way to school in the morning, I would go and set up the coffee and put the grits water on. And before I went on to school, I walked to school. It was probably a good mile to school, and barefooted. I never wore any shoes until I went in the 7th grade, and they wouldn't let me ride the bus without shoes. And then a guy came to the area there, and he bought the old army horses. Uh-huh. And he wanted to change them over and make saddle horses so he could sell them, you know, with the horses. And so he hired me to ride those horses. And so we'd take them, ride them down to 6 Mile Creek and jump them off into the water, you know, and all kinds of stuff, and make saddle horses out of them.
Weren't these army horses already saddle horses with the army saddles?
Yeah, but they were tough-mouthed, and they were hard to make go where you wanted them to go, you know, because they had fought them so hard, you know. Oh. And we changed the bits too, because they had the old double trigger bits on them, you know.
Right.
So we changed the bits and made it a lot easier bit on their mouth, and made them a whole lot easier to transfer over to make good saddle horses out of it.
Now, first of all, where is all this happening in this United States?
It happened in the Tampa, Florida area near Uceda.
Oh, okay.
Which was out east of town, east of 7th Avenue. And I guess I did that all the way up until I was had to go to to the 7th grade, and then I was in the 7th grade about I don't know 6 months, I guess, and my mother and dad got a divorce, and so we moved to Lakeland. But before that, I told you I worked for the grocery store. They cleaned the chicken, did everything, and there for him until the 7th grade. That was my first working career. And but my mother was not just my mother. My mother was my buddy. We did things together. I would go hunting, and with a slingshot at first, and then she bought me a single-shot .22 rifle, and she would buy me a box of shells, or 50 in the shells, and I had to bring back 45 of something, no matter what it was, as long as there was 45 of them. And then she would buy me another box, but if I didn't get the 45, I had to buy my own, with the money. I mean, that was the deal. So that gave me an incentive to sneak up and get close and make sure that I killed whatever I was shooting at.
So bringing back 45 of something means 45 of something you all could eat when you got home.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And then later, after we moved to Lakeland, Florida, the railroad yards there, they had a cleaning track, and where they cleaned out the boxcars and get them ready to move, so a lot of them were hauled grain, and so they had people that cleaned the cars, and they'd sweep it out on the ground, and consequently there was hundreds of pigeons there. And so my mother bought me a shotgun, and that old 12 gauge that you saw in the trophy room in there, and that old pump shotgun. And sometimes I'd go down there and kill 60 or 70 pigeons, and I'd bring them home, and my mother would help me clean every one of them, and then she would put them in jars. She'd can them and put them in jars, and then cook them with dumplings, and they were really, really good eating.
Really?
And times were hard, but we didn't realize it, us kids. I had 3 older sisters, and the 2 oldest sisters, they both wanted to be school teachers. Didn't happen, but that's what they wanted to be, and so they used me for their student. And so when I went to the 1st grade, I was only 5. Back then, you could go if you were before you were 6. My birthday was in December, so I was only 5. And by the time I went to the 1st grade, I could write longhanded, I could read, and so I only stayed 1 day in the 1st grade, and they promoted me to the 2nd, and I only stayed 2 weeks in the 5th grade, and they promoted me to the 6th.
Okay, you jumped from 2nd grade to 5th just then.
Yeah, I did the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th,
right,
and only 2 weeks in the 5th, and they promoted me to the 6th grade. And so I credit that education program that my 2 older sisters gave me, which helped me tremendously in my career, because I only got one opportunity to go to college, and that was when I was stationed at Shaw Air Force Base in South Carolina, and we rode a GI bus 44 miles to Columbia to Fort Jackson, and I got 18 college credits there from the University of South Carolina, but that was the only formal education that I got. And I left high school in the 10th grade.
No, this is in Lakeland, right?
This is in Lakeland, yeah.
Didn't you play football in high school?
Yeah, I played football in high school in Lakeland and also in San Diego, California, because I left and went to San Diego. My sister and her husband worked for Consolidated Volunteer Aircraft Company during the war. And so she wanted me to come out there and live with them. And they had 20 acres right in the middle where the San Diego Zoo is now.
Oh.
And so I went out there and went to school for a little over a year, played football there, and came back home to Lakeland. And then I played the next year, and then I had three really good friends that we did just about everything together, and I was working for a drugstore out off of the lake, and
This is before you're in the Air Force.
yeah,
Okay, yeah.
and so they said, well, we'll meet you in front of the drugstore at the park when you get off work. I said, okay. So I went there, and they said, come on, we're going to go break in a hardware store and steal some guns and go have some fun. And I said, nah, not me. I'm going home. So I did. I went home, and my mother had a bad back, and so I went home and give her a back massage. This was like 10:30 at night, you know, because I didn't get off work at the drugstore till 9 because I was a stock boy too, you know. Yeah. And so they broke in a hardware store and got some guns and went down South Florida Avenue and shot out all the street lights and shot up a Orange Grove pump house, and the law caught them. And so the judge gave them the option of either going to jail or going in the military.
Right.
So they all went in the military.
Yeah.
And so they came to the house that night and arrested me because we were always together. You know, we all played on the football team together, and so my mother told them, said, well, he wasn't with them. He was home. You know, but they didn't believe that. So they took me to jail, put me in jail with them. And our Sunday school teacher was a lawyer there in Lakeland. D.C. Laird was his name, and he was also called the Mass Marvel. He was a pool shark, traveled all over. And so my mother called Mr. Laird, and so he went down there and chewed some butts, and they got me out of jail, and you know, went home. So about 4 months later, I guess, or 5 months later, I told my mother, I said, I miss my buddies. You know, I'd really like to go in the military. And she said, you're not old enough to go in the military. You know, you're only 15. And I said, I don't care. I want to go.
Well, your buddies were 15 too, weren't they? Or...
No, they were a year older than me. One of them was 2 years older than me. He was 2 years ahead in school. And so my mother changed my birth certificate for me, so I could go in the military. And it was years later before we ever got that change back to where it was supposed to be, you know.
What branch of the service did you join?
I was in the Air Force.
There was no Air Force.
Army Air Force.
Right.
I was in the Army Air Force, and I played football there. This was before the NFL started back up, and they had the North American Football League, and so they had 11 service teams and 22 non-service teams in the North American League in there. And Doc Blanchard was our football coach. You know who Doc Blanchard?
Name's familiar.
Doc Blanchard and Glenn Davis, Mr. Inside, Mr. Outside, and for Army, and nobody beat him for 4 consecutive years in college in there. And Doc Blanchard had graduated from the Army and came there to get his flight training at Shaw Air Force because we had 3 fighter squadrons there. Right. And so he was our football coach. And that was really a great experience for me. And he was such a super nice guy. And everybody took really good care of me because I was just a kid. You know, I was young. And then the base commander come to me and said, how would you like to work for me? And his name was Colonel Morale. And I said, yes, sir. If you want me to, I will. And so he said, I want you to. And so I then went to work for him. And my first sergeant was Sergeant Knight, and he was on the Burma March with the Japs, you know, in there, and they would shoot them when they fell out. You know, he was on that march.
No, he was on that march after the time you're talking about.
Yeah, this was in World War II,
right.
You know, back in World War II before me. And so in my book, The Common Man, I wrote the story about this general was coming there for a base inspection, and our base commander was a golfer, and he had already signed up to play in a golf tournament in Columbia. And he said, Henry, I ain't going to be here for that inspection. You got to do whatever you got to do to get me out of it. I don't care what it is. I'm going to play in that golf tournament. So I said, okay, I'll come up with something.
You're going to get the base commander out of an inspection?
Yeah. And so he left and went to the thing, you know.
Yeah.
So I called the florist, and I ordered 4 things of flowers, you know, and had them sent out there to the base. And so I called the first sergeant for General Whitehead and said, look, my commander, base commander, mother passed away, and he had to go to the funeral. And I had all these sympathy cards and all wrote down all over the desk and everything. And so it went over great. You know, it happened good. Everybody knew what was going on, and so it went over great. And General Whitehead, he came and went, but I found out from the first sergeant everything that I needed to know about him. And so we had the best thing that he liked to drink, the best thing he liked to eat, you know. So I had it all set up where he was happy when he left. So everything went real well until he got a bill from the florist for $116 for flowers.
Well, it got him a golf game with the general, right?
Yeah, that's right. And that was a neat experience and a funny thing that happened during my career in the Air Force.
Now, were you in the Air Force during World War II?
No. This was in 1947, 48.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. World War II was.
So, how long were you in the military? 2 years?
Well, I was in for 2 years, and then I stayed in the reserve for 2 years, and then they called me back during the Korean War.
Yeah.
And I went to Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama. Beautiful base. I don't know if you ever got there or not, but it's beautiful. The river run right through the middle of the base and stuff. And so they had, because I was running, at that time I was already an engineer for the railroad.
Oh, whoa! Then let's not skip over that. You get out of the Air Force, you're in the reserves.
Yeah. So
and how did you?
When I got out of the Air Force in the reserve, my daddy had me a job on the Atlantic Coastline Railroad as a fireman, and this was back when we had all steam engines, and because the Atlantic Coastline was the last railroad to dieselize because they own their own coal mines in Alabama and in Kentucky. And so we had steam engines until 1957, and we dieselized that after 1957. And so I worked for the railroad. Actually ended up 28 and a half years working for the railroad in there, and that was my longest career there. But
now, as a fireman, you're up there shoveling coal into the engine.
Shoveling coal with a scoop shovel.
Right.
Yeah. And you had to fire 100,000 miles before you could take the exam to be a locomotive engineer. And you could take a test every 30,000 miles, you know. And the last one was 40,000. But before I went into the military, right before I went into the military, it was the World War II was on. The farmers couldn't get any help. Both of my parents were both farmers. You know, their families were all farmers, and so they farmed me out during the summer when I was out of school. You know, I would go and work on the farms. Yeah. And that was really made a great childhood for a kid. You know. And there's some, in my book, The Common Man, I'll tell you some funny stories about what happened on the farms. You know?
Please do.
Sir?
Please do, yeah.
Well, one, I was living at this time with Uncle Walter and Cousin Emmy Bullard out of Bennettsville, South Carolina. and I had done something, and I don't remember exactly what I did, but they punished me and wouldn't let me go to town with them on Saturday because they only went to town on Saturday.
Mhm.
And so I had to stay there and shuck corn. And back then we had to shuck the corn for the mules, you know.
Mm.
And so it was really hot in the middle of the summer. And so it was a half-mile walk to the creek, but it was only 15 yards over to the well. And so I decided that I'd jump in the well. So I stripped off and grabbed the bucket and jumped off down in the well. And I was swimming around there, having a good time. It was nice and cold, water wasn't. In the meantime, they came home. And I was humming and singing and carrying on, and they got out of the car and they could hear the noise, but they couldn't figure where it was coming from. And they looked under the house and they went down to the corral. They looked everywhere, they couldn't find out. But finally, their son David came over, and the closer he got the well, the louder it got, So finally he looked over in the well, and there I was down there in the well. So he made me get a hold of the bucket, and he pulled me up.
Well, had they not come home, you'd still be in that well, wouldn't you?
Yeah, because I'd had to climb the rope to get out of there, I never thought about that, as a kid. And so they beat my tail. And they had a long trough, and it was from where the well was to the corral. They called it a lot back in them days. There was about far as from here to the far end of the cabin there.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a long trough, and you'd have to dip water out of the well and pour it to water the stock down there, And we had one buggy horse and 6 mules. And the younger mules, we could just throw them corn on the cob in there.
Mm-hmm.
But the 2 older mules, we had to shell it for them, And so they made me dip water out of the well, because I had been swimming that thing, About 2 hours, I pulled water up and poured it in. That was my punishment for swimming in the well.
Did the mules? No, Flynn. No. Did the mules eat anything besides the corn, or did they have anything else?
Fodder. Back then we pulled fodder. You know what fodder is?
I'm
That's
sure.
the leaves on the corn.
Okay.
And you'd go by and you'd strip the leaves off the corn
Yeah.
till you got a bundle about that big.
Yeah.
Put it under your arm. Then you'd take 2 long leaves and wrap it around it and stick it in there, in that thing there, and make a bundle. And they used that for fodder to feed during the wintertime, and also the pea vines. We used pea vine hay, because we didn't raise alfalfa or none of that back in those days.
Mm-hmm.
And
So that's what fodder is. Because I've heard the expression cannon fodder,
yeah,
you know. Which
it's just to strip the leaves off and wrap them and put the tie in there, to hold them.
And they'll chew on it like tobacco or something.
Yeah, they'd eat it, man. They loved it. And then they had they raised tobacco, and in North Carolina and South Carolina they raised tobacco, and I worked the tobacco farms there 2 different summers, and that was interesting. I learned all how to work tobacco, and we had tobacco warehouse in Baxley, Georgia, there, and I worked there tagging tobacco behind the auctioneer when I was 9.
9 years old?
When I was 9 years old, yeah, they had my great-grandfather was a big political guy, personal friend of President Hoover and all, and he had a farm, and he had 16 acres of turpentine trees and stuff, and so he raised tobacco, and he had a lot of pull with the tobacco people, and so he got me the job tagging tobacco behind the auctioneer, and they had 2 rows. Tobacco was in baskets about this size, and it was already graded. Each basket had a certain grade of tobacco. Some tobacco was for cigarettes, some was for pipe tobacco, some was for cigars. You know, but it was already graded out. And so when the auctioneer went down, all he had to do was look at the tag, you know, and then the buyers would buy the tobacco, and so all I had to do was write down who bought it. You know, they had it was a score sheet kind of, and they had the different tobacco, Leggett Tobacco Company, you know, American Tobacco Company, Lucky Strike, you know, and all. And that's all I had to do was check that, and write the price down, whatever it was. That's all I had to do. And we'd go down one side, and you get to the other end, and it was further than from here to the cabin, maybe half again that long, the tobacco warehouse was. And we got to the other end, the auctioneer would always buy you a Coke. You know, man, that was something, you know.
Yeah, great.
Back during the Depression. And there, so that was one of my early jobs, you know, was tagging tobacco behind the auctioneer. Did everything on the farm. I plowed mules, where I had to hold the plow stock up like that. You know, I wasn't big enough to talk on that thing. Great, great, great life with our families in both farms. And my great-grandfather, who I patterned my life after in Georgia, and my mother's folks in South Carolina. And so they farmed me out between the two of them in there. And in my trophy room out there, I have my great-grandfather. I have his rifle. It's 175 years old now. It was called a little boy's rifle. It was a 32 rimfire, short. And it had you could buy a regular bullet for it, or you could buy birdshot, you know, to go in it. And he was a ventriloquist. And we'd go to town in the buggy, about 3.5 miles from the farm, and he had a dog named Shot, and the dog would run underneath the buggy in the shade all the way to town. You know, he'd trot underneath it, and he'd talk to the dog, and the dog would talk back to it. You know, and I thought, man, that was the greatest thing in the world. And so when we get to town, every store we went to wouldn't be but a few minutes before there'd be a bunch of people in there wanting him to perform, you know, in there. And he was also a man of the stars. President Hoover sanctioned him to make a perpetual calendar where the dates would always be the same, and he did it. And then they took it to Congress, and then Congress wouldn't pass it. You know, so that's the reason you got split times right now. You know. And but I have a copy of how he did it, how he put it all together.
I'd like to see that.
My daughter's got it now. She's taking care of all of our historical stuff of the family, but I can get a copy for you.
Gotcha. Interesting.
And, he was a fiddle player, and he used to take me fishing all the time. And he always told me, don't ever catch more fish than you can eat, because if you don't, you'll always have fish to catch when you come back. You know, he had a bamboo fly rod, and he used a calico cloth, which was a coarse material, and he cut it in a strip about 6 inches long and about that wide, and tie it on the end of his fly line, and then he just dangle it over there. And they had red fin and yellow fin pike, and they were long fish. They get about that long and about that big around.
And they would go for this piece of cloth?
And yeah, they'd hit that. They have teeth. The pike have teeth in the front, and they'd hit the cloth, and their teeth would hang in the cloth, and you could just lift them out. You know.
Well, great. Didn't have to yank a hook out of their mouths.
No.
What a great idea. I'll be darned. I'm getting a little thirsty. You want to take a little break?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
You got out of the Air Force, then you went back into the Air Force during Korea.
Yeah.
Were you sent over to Korea?
Yeah. No.
Stateside?
No, and then what happened was I was running passenger troop trains out of MacDill Air Force Base as an engineer. because of what I was doing when they called me back, they said that they needed my position on the railroad worse than they needed me for what I was doing.
Yeah.
And so they sent me back so I could run troop trains out of MacDill Field in there. So.
And that train would run right into MacDill, right out of the base?
Yeah, we went right into MacDill, picked them up, took them wherever they needed to go.
How about that? Tell me more about, well, you worked for the railroad for 26 years. I guess you retired.
28 and a half years altogether.
So you retired from the railroad, right?
Yeah, well, I was in that wreck I told you about out of Tampa.
Oh, the car wreck.
Yeah, the taxi driver was taking us from the hotel to the train station.
Yeah.
He ran a red light, hit another car head on, and almost killed all of us. So then that's what retired me from the railroad. And during the time that I was off from the railroad, I built the golf course at Osteen, Florida, which is just out of Sanford, just a little bit going towards DeLand. In there, I built a golf course and RV park.
Now, okay, one does not step off a locomotive and go build a golf course. Excuse me.
Let me tell you what happened. Carol's uncle came to visit us, and I had this 65 acres of land that we lived on. I built our house and everything. I built everything, this and everything here. And so he was a golfer big time. So he said, well, why don't you go out there and mow the pasture, and I'll down by the road there, and we can hit golf balls, So I said, okay. So I took the mower and I mowed out the big place there, and so put some coffee cans in the ground, and we were, playing cow pasture golf. And people were coming by on the highway there, and they stopped and say, "You gonna build a golf course here?" I said, "I wasn't planning on it." And he said, "Well, it's a good place because Deltona, which was a big company, a big housing development there, they promised everybody that if they bought a lot there, that they could join the golf course for $60. And it ended up, after they got it almost full, then they changed it to $600 a year membership, and so I built my golf course out there, and I took a lot of their business away. People wouldn't pay the $60; they'd come out there and play on my golf course.
This golf course was on your property?
It's on my property, yeah.
A 9-hole golf course?
9-hole.
On your property?
On my property, yeah. I don't know. There was a big grass lake there we were on, and I dug out a big place there and took a canal up into the front part near the office, and I had a swimming hole there for the kids because I had an RV park too.
You did. You owned an RV park.
Yeah, that was part of my program. There was the golf course and the RV park, and I had a putt-putt golf, for the kids and stuff, and had a white sand beach, and then a canal that went out into the lake where we dug it out there. And then on the golf course itself, I had 9 holes, and I dug lakes on 7 out of 9 holes. And I hit water on all 7 of the lakes, and every one of them, all 7 of them, filled up within 2 days. From the springs, from the thing there. And so you remember the Goosey Tour? That you were anchoring when the Goosey Tour was playing in Florida.
What's a Goosey Tour?
That was a golf tour.
Oh.
A professional golf tour. It was called the Goosey Tour.
No, I didn't know that. I'm not a golfer.
Oh, you're not?
And I don't follow sports.
And they, those guys would come out there and play, because they could hit every green with irons. They could just hit their irons all day long.
On your place?
Yeah,
on your
my
course.
place. But I wouldn't let them hit off my tees because they'd take a divot that long, They have to
These are pros that came and played on your course.
Mm-hmm. And then I was a member of the Central Florida Golf Course Superintendents Association, and I was vice president of that. And it just worked out that after I got hurt for the railroad, one of the guys that was living in the RV park decided he wanted to buy the golf course.
Mm-hmm.
So I sold it to him, and Carol and I moved to Montana. And about a year later, his son got out of college and came there, and he was going to cut a fat hog in the ass on the golf course and all. And
He was going to do what?
well,
I couldn't hear what you said.
well, maybe it's a good thing.
No, that's I edit that. You can say
On the golf course and changed everything around from what I had done. Changed a lot of it.
but he kept it a golf course.
Yeah.
But he it up.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Exactly.
Right.
And so the business went down.
Yeah.
In there. So his daddy called me and he said, Henry, he said, I can't finish paying you. I'm just going to deed it back to you. So I said,
Because he lost
okay.
all the golf course business.
So I was in Montana, so I had to come back and redo the whole golf course, fix it back to where it was right.
Mm-hmm.
And I did. And then while I was fixing it, this guy from New York showed up there, and he said, I sure do like this place. I said, you want to buy it? And he said, yeah. I said, you got it, so we negotiated the deal, and I sold it to him, and then we moved to Montana, and we were living in town then, in a house in town, so I bought the ranch when we sold the golf course. And I bought the ranch there
In Montana.
in Montana.
What year was that you sold the golf course for the
So
second
see, I
time?
think it was 1974.
Okay.
Yeah, 1974.
So 74.
Because we left and went to Africa in 1980, and we had been there about 6 years outfitting
In Montana.
there in Montana.
And when you went to Africa, you mean on a hunting trip or to live?
We went to Africa to make a movie for Safari Club International out of Las Vegas.
Okay.
My attorney was the attorney for Safari Club. And so they wanted to make a movie in Africa so they could promote Americans to go to Africa.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what we did. We went there. We were there 44 days filming and making the movie. It was called To Africa and Return.
And you played a part in this movie? This was a drama?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Oh, it was a drama.
And then the guy that did the filming was from University of Florida. He was head of the filming department for the University of Florida.
Uh-huh.
And somehow in shipping, he shipped the stuff back by boat to the United States, and it got wet somehow, salt water. Some of it got wet, and I still got a lot of it in there. But my daughter and Dawn in Bozeman, she's having this outfit take all the stuff that we saved that had the video, had the audio. Some of that was destroyed in the.
So the movie was never put together?
It was never finished.
Some idiot sent it back on a boat and it got wet.
Yeah.
44 days of filming.
44 days.
Who was the idiot who did that?
And his name was Ralph Adams, and he was from the University of South Carolina,
South Florida.
University of Florida. Head of the filming division there.
Who was paying for this film?
Safari Club International.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that cost them a fortune to do that.
Yeah.
They're paying to have a whole film crew in Africa for 44 days filming.
Yeah.
And then they never got their movie.
Yeah.
Did they sue that idiot?
I don't know. They might have.
Well, you say you're in the movie?
Yeah.
Did you play a role?
They filmed my hunting in the movie, and mine and my attorney, some of his and his wife's, she was in the movie also.
Yeah.
And it was a great opportunity for me because all I had to pay for was the permits. I didn't have to pay for the hunting because we went from one outfitter organization to another outfitter because every place that we went, they were advertising through Safari Club International, so that's how they recouped some of their money that way. So,
Safari Club International wasn't paying for the permits?
Were they what?
They weren't paying for the permits?
No, I paid for the permits myself.
Why would you pay for the permits? You're making a movie to promote Safari Club International.
Well, they wouldn't pay for the permits. They paid all the expenses, bought all the airfares, paid all the other people to do everything except for the permits themselves. And I'm not sure that they would have let them done that. Bought the permits for somebody else.
Permit has to be held by the guy who's doing the hunting. I see.
Yeah.
That makes it. Well, they should have reimbursed you.
Yeah. And then we rented a vehicle and we drove all the way across Zimbabwe. And then we flew to Windhoek and went into Damaraland. And we hunted in Damaraland 12 days, I guess, with Volker Gremlin, German outfit, German guy, super nice guy. And that, I don't know if you've ever been to that area or not, but it looks like it rained rocks there for about 3 weeks. You know, everything's just solid rock.
Wow.
In there.
No, I've not been there.
In there. But, you know, I killed 3 of the big 5 while I was on the hunting trip. And then all the other animals in there that are in the world record book, you know. So it was a fantastic experience. And not only that, Bob, but they paid for Carol and Dawn went with us. And Eric and his 2 children, the attorney for them.
Yeah.
You know, they paid for that also. And then they paid that idiot that did the filming and stuff. A funny thing happened. One of the guys, the outfitters that were there, he was a guide really, and his name was Rhino, or that was his nickname was Rhino. And so we had been there for about 14, 15 days, and we hadn't got a picture of Rhino yet in there. And so we were driving cross country there in the Land Rover, and we looked off down there about 60 yards, and there was a rhino standing down there. And the rhino said, "Stop, stop, stop." So we stopped, and he said, "Okay, Fred, get the cameras ready, get in the back." He said, "For $50, I'll go down there and let that rhino chase me back to the truck." I said, "You got it. I'll give you the $50 if you'll do that." He said, "Okay." And so he goes down there. He's got the camera running. He goes down there and you know, that rhino falls to the ground 2 or 3 times, and here he comes, and they come flying back up there. And he was going to run right into the truck. In fact, he did hit the tailgate of the truck, because Fred quit filming, jumped over in the front seat, and took off just as the rhino got to the truck.
Oh, he started driving the truck away.
Yeah, but it hit the back end of the truck, just did bump it, you know, and the rhino went on by. It was really funny.
The guy that was running back to the truck.
He dove in the back of the truck.
Oh, he got into the truck, right.
Yeah.
Because that rhino knocked your truck like rolling down.
Uh-huh.
God, that's dangerous.
It was crazy.
Yeah. Okay, so now you're out in Montana.
Okay.
And this is your 20 some odd years of outfitting.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, we were started in 1978, I think it was. And it worked out that I guided before. I was going out there hunting every year. We went out there, Carol and I and my attorney and his wife went out there every year for about 8 years. And so then this one outfitter out of Dillon, Montana, he worked for the Parks Department for Montana, but he was also outfitted in the wintertime. And so he asked me if I wanted to guide for him, you know, and I said, yeah, I can get away from the railroad, you know, I can come guide maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks, you know. He said, okay. And so I did my time as a guide, and so when we moved to Montana, I stood to take the outfitter exam, because you had to have so many months of guiding experience before you could even take the test to be an outfitter. And there was a lot of medical stuff in there, and Carol worked for the doctor in town, and so he spent a lot of time with me with the medical. I could almost operate on somebody.
I was going to say, the medical stuff, not your physical condition, but your ability to care for people that might be hurt.
In the backcountry, yeah.
Right.
In the backcountry.
Gotcha.
Because all my hunting camps were all pack-in backcountry camps.
Sure.
And so I guess it paid off in a couple of instances. We had one guy from New York that jumped from one ledge to the other in the snow, and he had on some orange coveralls, and he had his binoculars zipped up inside of it like that. And the guide tried to take his gun and let him down, but he said, "Oh no, I'll just jump," you know. So he jumped down there, and when he hit that snow, there was ice underneath it, and it pitched him forward, and he fell face down on the rocks in front of him, and the binoculars hit the rock and crushed his sternum. And so we had to get him out of there and get him to the hospital. We were 65 miles from a hospital. And so halfway there, he went into shock. And so I had him in a sleeping bag, so I got one of the guides to get in the sleeping bag with him, for warmth in there.
Sure.
And we got him there all right, and he survived.
Oh, that's
And
good.
stuff. So then another time I had a guy that we were going around on this big tall hill there, and I said, "You go around this side, and I'll go around this side. If there's anything on my side, it'll come over to you, and you could, if there's any elk over there." Mm-hmm. And he only had to go maybe 300 yards or 4 maybe at the most. And when I got the other end, he never showed up, so I said, damn. So I started around there where he was, and I got to him, and he was standing there humped over, and he was hyperventilating. He was going, like that, and he turned white as a sheet. Well, I had fixed us lunches for the day, mm-hmm. and I had them in a big grocery bag, in there. And so I just took them out of my backpack and dumped the lunches on the ground, and put that bag over his head and held it tight, until he quit hyperventilating. And I took him to the hospital, and he wouldn't get out of the truck. He was too embarrassed to get out.
Well, why was he hyperventilating?
He got scared.
Scared?
Yeah, he just got scared from being by himself. He'd never been on a hunt before. This was his first hunt, And how you could hear the cars on the highway out there. It wasn't that far.
Scared. My goodness.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought maybe he'd gotten winded or something by having to hike that far. No.
No, he just got scared.
Oh, well. Oh, my goodness. Where'd you learn to fly? You flew planes, right?
Started in Tampa.
Yep.
And I had about, 65 hours, I guess, in Tampa. And I wanted to learn to do stunt flying.
Stunt flying.
And my instructor got drunk and flew underneath the bridge there on Hillsborough River. And they took his license. And so when he did that, I quit. And then I didn't fly anymore until I got to Montana. And
which bridge on the Hillsborough River, do you know?
The bridge downtown?
Well, there's several.
Yeah.
There's the railroad bridges.
No, the railroad's got too many things. It's the one that's got the span in it. It was wide enough.
Like on Kennedy, maybe? Oh,
yeah. Yeah.
Well, I tell you what, he was a damn good pilot.
Yeah, he was a damn fool, too.
Didn't have too much room above or below.
Yeah. And but they took his license, they grounded him, and so then I didn't fly anymore until I got to Montana, and then I became the vice president and the president and then the executive director and public relations guy for the outfitters for about 14 years, and so in Montana everything is so far apart, it paid me to fly to places rather than have to
sure.
drive, because if I drove, they had to pay overnight, at a
Yeah,
place, and
yeah.
then 3 or 4 meals and stuff.
Yeah.
Where I could fly there in the morning and be back by noon,
Sure.
at the house.
Yeah.
And so they actually paid for my airplane, and I had a 172 with a 190 horse engine in
Yeah.
it, and was flying in the mountains, all the time.
Oh yeah.
And I've done a lot of night flying from one place to the other. I flew everywhere. Went to Seattle, Salt Lake, everywhere. I flew everywhere. So.
When I
And then
go ahead.
excuse me,
No, yeah.
while I'm thinking about it, this friend of mine at the airport in Helena was a flight instructor, and he said, Henry, you've got 1,600 hours now. Why don't you take the search and rescue course for Montana? You can fly search and rescue. I said, dang, yeah, I'd love to do that,
Yeah.
And so I did. I took the search and rescue course and passed it. And that was one of the most exciting experiences I ever had flying, because it was all short field landings, all in the canyons. You had to fly down to the canyon and do wing overs to get out of there and go back, And you had to know that there was downdrafts on the east side and updrafts on the west side. And that I learned more about flying than I had in the previous 1,600 hours. Just taking that search and rescue course.
I believe it.
And
So, I don't want to just skip over 26 years or whatever it was of being an outfitter, owning your own
well, being an
campsites.
outfitter, one of the things that I think made my life more interesting was that being head of the outfitters, I represented the outfitters on everything from permits with the United States Forest Service to the fishing game permits. Whenever they had a problem, I was the guy that represented them. And then I also published a newspaper called the Mule Milk News for the outfitters.
Oh, so you're a newspaper publisher too?
Yeah, I did. In fact, I got a copy, and if the kids didn't throw it away, I got several copies of it. And then being able to fly from place to place all over to all the outfitter conventions and stuff for 11 years. And then they elected me president of North American Outfitters. The flight instructor later was flying for the Idaho Fishing Game Department, and he had one of the fishing game guys with him, and they were tracking a grizzly bear, had a collar on. They were tracking him in Yellowstone Park.
Yeah.
And they had an engine failure, and they punched in the trees, and they didn't find him for 3 years.
Oh, he was killed.
Yeah.
How many people on board?
Just him and the fishing game guy. They were just two of them.
And this is where Yellowstone?
It was in Yellowstone Park, yeah.
And they didn't find him for 3 years?
For 3 years, he just punched a hole in the trees.
Yeah.
And when you're flying search and rescue, all you do when you're the pilot, you just fly.
Right.
And you have an observer that
Sure.
does all the looking.
Right.
Because you got to know exactly what you're doing
Yeah.
in a second,
Yeah.
And but in those big fir trees, it's 150 foot tall and
Oh,
stuff.
yeah, sure.
When they go in there, they'll break some limbs off, but they just punch a hole in them.
Yeah.
And so that we flew for him, looking for him and all, and never found him.
No, you could fly right over the hole where he went in and not see it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then somebody was in there illegally hunting elk horns to sell, and they run up on the airplane in there. And
Well, nice of them to report it since they weren't supposed to be there. Well, there's no law against being there. It's just why they were there, right?
And for 11 years, I guided in the Bob Marshall Wilderness for Don Dunn, another outfitter, older guy. He was in his 60s then, and it was a 16-mile pack-in trip into where his camp was. And
That's way in, 16 miles.
yeah, it was 16 miles in there. And he had a packer named Roy Erasmus. And so I told Don, I said, Ed, if there's any time that I'm not guiding a hunter, I'd like to make a trip in and out with him and get him to teach me everything he can teach me about packing in there. And so he did. And so I learned about packing for him. And then Smoke Eltzer was an outfitter. He also taught packing to the Army and stuff, and he was an outfitter out of Missoula. And he ran a packing school for outfitters, so I went to that and graduated from that packing school also. So, I could do my own packing. And then I hired a guide named Ross Schustrom, and he used to pack into the Grand Canyon for that ranch that was at the bottom, where the mules went down in there. And that's what he did for them. He packed stuff in and out for 7 years for them. So I hired him as a guide in there, and he was unbelievable packing.
Yeah.
So.
Did you ever lose a pack horse?
No, yeah, one time, but not a horse, a mule.
Okay.
We were doing a switchback, and the switchback was so tight going into Smith River Pass that when they made the switchback, the ass swung out over the cliff. It was 1,000 feet down there, and the mule stopped to take a bite of a bush that was sticking out of there, and the other mule bumped him like that, and he went over. Of course, those ropes are designed to break, to keep when you got them tailed, and so he went over and went down the hill and killed him. But that was the only time. While I was working for the railroad, I also guided on the St. Johns River. I had a boat, and I guided bass fishermen.
Uh-huh.
And then with Mel Tillis and we worked together out of Cloiston, and we guided bass fishermen in Lake Okeechobee.
Uh-huh.
And he had his boat, and I had mine in there. But one interesting thing happened on the St. Johns River. We were up, I guess, almost to Highway 40, and this client had his grandson with him who was like 15 or 16, and so he told him, be careful throwing that plug, because you might hit me or you might hit the guide.
Sure.
And it wasn't too long before he reared back, and the plug came loose on the back wing and went around and hit his granddad, and the hook went around his jugular vein. It didn't go in it, luckily. It went around it.
Yeah, but if it yanked it, it could have been a problem.
Yeah, so I hit it right into the bank, and so I got him out of the boat, and I said, we're a long way from anything. I don't know how we're going to do this. And I'd cut the line away from the plug, and I said,
it went in and around it, but it hadn't come back out again?
Yeah, it went around it, and it was hooked in there like that, going around. Good. So I said, I'm afraid that if we try to take you away from here, and another boat passes and a rocket and slap another boat in there, it might puncture your jugular vein, and then we'd be in real trouble.
Right.
And his name was Carl Corpening, and he said, well, Henry, have you got a sharp knife? I said, yeah. He said, well, let me lay down here and you cut it out.
Yeah.
And I said, if you can stand it, I can cut it out, I think.
Yeah.
So I got my pliers and I cut the hook off at the shank. Uh-huh. And just so I had enough room to get a hold of it. And I took my knife and I said, all right, get ready. And I So I had to split it about a half inch. I split it about a half inch. And I took my needle nose pliers and got that thing. And
By the
shoved
barb
it.
end?
Huh?
By the barb?
The barb was in, and it was wrapped around his jugular vein. So I had to get it away from there.
Okay.
So I pushed it with the needle nose pliers.
Yeah.
It got it far enough that I could get in there and cut the barb off. So I cut that one barb off, and then I shoved it further till I got to the other barb and cut that barb off.
Oh, that was a big hook then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I reached in and got it and pulled it on out of there, in there. But I tell you what, I was shaking like a dog passing the peach seat.
Yeah, and I'll bet he was pissed when he got your bill as a surgeon.
Yeah. And we took him to the hospital, and the doctor said, "Hey, it's fine." You know, they put some Benadine. Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Benadine in it, and he sewed it up, and it was fine.
Yeah.
After that was the interesting thing happened. We was talking about the St. Johns River. You know.
Yeah.
Carol used to paddle me on the St. Johns River, and we were fishing there one day, and I'm a fly fisherman, and I threw my fly over there at a stump, and it went a little too far, and it hit in the stump and hung up, and so I said, okay, I said, I'm going to give me the paddle, I'm going to paddle you over there and reach over there and get it and get the plug out of the stump for me, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so she said, all right. And so I got up there, and just as the boat bumped the stump, she put her hand out and about a moccasin took his head up out of the stump.
More moccasin? Oh, my God.
She screamed and jumped back. So I ended up taking the paddle, you know, and get it to hold of the thing and got it up with the paddle in there.
Jesus, yeah.
And you ask her, she scared the shit out of her.
Yeah. I was saying you went fishing for water moccasins
Yeah.
in stumps along the St. Johns.
Yeah, and that was on the St. Johns River.
Yeah. How about
Oh,
that?
man.
Well, let me think. Now, well, here you are, 90 years old, and you're still doing this.
Okay.
You're still outfitting.
Okay, there in Montana, I started the wagon trains for disabled kids.
Uh-huh.
And I did that as a favor to the outfitting industry. And so we did that, and it was very successful. And we got national publicity. We had National Geographic. We had Saturday Evening Post. You know, it was national thing in there. And it was really successful. But it got to the place where we couldn't get enough kids to make it worthwhile for the effort it took to put it all together.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'd have like 11 to 14 wagons
Yeah.
and 40 riders,
Yeah.
you know, and doctors and nurses and stuff, you know, to go on there. And so I said, well, to Flynn's, I said, you guys have got the ranch and you got the cattle, and I'm an outfitter, and I know the other outfitters, I'm head of the outfitters. I said, why don't we take the cattle, we have to move them from the valley where we feed them all winter,
Mhm.
and to the high country where they spend the summer.
Mhm.
Why don't we do that and take healthy people?
Mhm.
And so we had a meeting, and we put that together, and then said, all right, so we called it the Montana High Country Cattle Drives, and we've been doing it 30 years. And we just did one for 30 years, my 65th one, my 65th cattle drive, and we celebrated my 90th birthday a little early on the cattle drive. And Carol and I's 56th wedding anniversary, we celebrated all on the same day, and had a big party and a cake and everything on the cattle drive.
Wonderful.
And there's Clayton and DeEtte was there. They were on there.
This just a few weeks ago, right?
Yeah, the last
Yeah.
cattle drive, yeah.
Yeah.
And their granddaughter.
Clayton gave me some GoPro footage he shot. He had this GoPro on this harness, GoPro camera, you know, and he's got some nice footage of that cattle drive.
Yeah, he was riding a horse and just filming it at the same time.
Exactly. It was
Yeah.
smooth.
I think we were talking about hunting in Montana when I was an outfitter.
Yeah.
And one of the funniest stories I ever had, I had a habit when I was guiding hunters that I kept chocolate malted milk balls in my pocket. You know those little chocolate malted milk balls in my pocket?
Yeah.
And so this German guy, he said he was going to hunt with me for about 5 years and never did, and then finally he did. And so he called me, and he was scared to fly, so he rode the train to Havre, Montana, which was 5 hours away from our ranch, and he called me and said, you can come get me. I said, they got a bus that runs from Havre to Townsend. You get on the bus and come down there. I ain't driving 5 hours there to get you. And I never seen this guy before.
Yeah.
And he don't real funny like that, you know. And when he wrote me a letter, the letters were big, printed big, like a school kid would do, a young kid.
Uh-huh.
Anyway, he came to the bus stop at the Mint restaurant there downtown. And so he called me and said, I'm at the Mint. I said, okay, I'll come down and get you. And so I went down there, and this outfitter friend of mine and his father-in-law, who guided for him, was sitting in this one booth there. And so I stopped to visit with them a minute, you know, and ask him about how hunting was doing, you know. And by that time, the waitress came over, and there was a guy sitting in the booth backed up against theirs, and he had a long ponytail, you know, and stuff. And she asked him what he wanted, you know. He said, well, I want it, whatever it was he ordered, you know. So I knew it was him as soon as he said that, see. So I winked at Audie, and I said, Audie, how's hunting going? He said, oh, it's going pretty good. We've killed a couple of pretty good elk so far, and several deer. And he said, how's yours going? And I said, well, it was doing pretty good, but I had this damn hippie. And he came, and he didn't want anybody but a cook and the guide, you know. And so I said, okay. So I put him in my white cow camp. You know where it is there on Kempton's, yeah. And I said, the sapsucker went off and left the guide and got lost. And I winked at Audie, and Audie said, dang, have you found him yet? I said, nah, you know, we're not going to look for him for 2 or 3 days, you know. We give him a chance to come on back. Yeah. He won't to, you know. and I said, them damn hippies are a pain in the ass. And this guy had a cap, and he had his pigtail through a hole in the back of the cap, you know. He done like it. Took that pigtail and turned it up and put the cap back on it. Oh, Lord. And so we talked a little bit, and then I said, I'm here to pick up this client, you know. And he said, it's me, you know. And so we took him into hunting camp. Well, the first day, my son guided him, and he didn't see an elk. So that night at supper time, he said, I want you to guide me tomorrow. You know, like you know more about guiding than the guide does, you know.
Right.
And I said, okay, I'll guide you tomorrow. And so the next morning, when I finished my breakfast, I did my own cooking in my hunting camp.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, all right, let's go. So we took out, and there was just a skiff of snow, maybe 1.5 inches or something on there. And we didn't even get out of my horse pasture, which was about 300 acres, before there was a bull and 3 cows. And it was a small bull, I could tell by the track. You know. I said, okay. Said, see that track right there? I said, that's your bull. So I don't want you to make any noise now. We're going to try to see if we can sneak up on him, you know. Okay. So we was going along there, and pretty soon there's a pile of elk shed there, and it was still smoking, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So they were right ahead of us. And I stopped, and I looked out, and I reached So in my pocket, I got a couple of those malted milk balls and put them in my hand. And I reached down and got all them milk turds, you know. And you know, I chewed on it, you know. And I reached down, got another one, and smelled it. I turned around and said, them sons of bitches been eating alfalfa. I reached back down, I got another one, I said, here, try one. Ain't eating no.
Oh my God.
So then that night, he got back and was down there in the tent with these other guys.
He still doesn't know you weren't eating elk shit.
Oh.
Okay.
And I didn't tell him no different.
Right.
And the other guys wouldn't tell him no different either,
Right.
you know. And he was telling him, he said, that's the craziest damn outfitter I ever seen. That we were going along and that there was a fella elk shut there that big, smoking. And he reaches down and he gets him a elk turd and eats that son of a bitch like it was candy. They were dying.
Is that why you carried those balls in your pocket? For the tourists?
No, really, they're high energy.
Yeah. Okay.
And when you're climbing in the mountains, you know,
Sure.
they're really handy to have.
Yeah, yeah.
But I thought that was a neat deal.
Oh,
And another thing that we did, I had this friend, Joe Shaw, who guided for me some, and he was a world-class sheep hunter. He hunted sheep all over the world. He had every slam that there was,
Yeah.
you know. And so he said, he was guiding for me this, and he said, Henry, he said, I want to float the Yukon River. And I said, dang, I'd like to do that. And he said, well, I got that 19-foot jet boat, you know, that we used in Outland fishing. And I said, yeah. He said, let's go next year and boat the Yukon River. And I said, okay. And so we did. We boated Yukon River for 1,100 miles. Carol went with us and his wife and Joe's wife, you know, the four of us, we went. And that was really, really an interesting
A
trip.
19-foot jet boat.
Yeah. And
Could
but
you refuel along the way?
there was only one place that you could get fuel, but we floated most of the way because we were going downstream.
Oh, you just drifted then?
Going towards Dawson City, you're
Yeah.
going downstream.
Yeah.
And it flows about 7 knots, the Yukon does.
Yep.
And so we got to Dawson City, and then we had to get back. So Carol and Nancy, they caught a bus and went back to Whitehorse, where we left, where we had this guy bring the trailer to, so we didn't have to go the other 100 miles all the way to Outland Lake.
Yeah.
And so Joe and I had to bring the boat back. And
On the trailer?
Huh?
On the trailer?
No, on the river. We had
1,100 miles back?
we had to come back, so we
Against
bought,
the
he
current?
bought 12 6-gallon cans of gasoline, and he had Joe was a chain smoker. Just one cigarette right after the other. And I thought, holy shit, you know, the whole boat was full of
Right.
gasoline. And when we got to Carmack's, which was the halfway mark in there, they have a little dock there, you know, about from here to there,
Right.
and it got a rope on it. And so when you pull up there to dock, you got to grab that rope. If you don't catch it, you know, then you're going back down the river again, you know. So as luck would have it, I grabbed it. I got a hold of it, and we had 1 gallon of fuel left when we. That's how close we come to going all the way back.
So you had to
Yeah.
completely top up all those different
Yeah.
cans as well as your primary tank.
And then we had to walk from, not quite from here to the highway out there, you know, carrying 2 6-gallon cans of gasoline, you
Yeah.
know. And so we had to make 3 trips, you know, back and forth.
Well, did they have a hose to fill up the boat's tank?
No, there was nothing there. You had to go into town, the Carmax, and get the gas, and then bring it down to the boat.
So you had to fill up the boat's fuel tank.
Yeah.
And then when that was full, then you had to fill up all those other cans.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
It was.
Why couldn't you trailer it back? Was there no road where you ended up?
No. See, we left Outland Lake, which was the headwaters of the Yukon.
Yeah.
And then Joe hired this guy to take the trailer, the boat trailer, and take it to Whitehorse and leave it, which was the first 100 miles of the trip, and leave it there for us so we could pick it up there on the way back and wouldn't have to boat that last 100
miles. I see.
You
Okay.
can.
Gotcha.
And so our boat trailer was at Whitehorse, which
Right.
was 1,000 miles away, in there.
I can't imagine going 1,000 miles in a jet boat or any kind of motorboat against 7 knots of current.
Yeah,
Good
it's
Lord.
something else.
That means you're lucky if you were making 10 or 15 knots over the bottom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it was really a fun trip. They only had one set of rapids on the whole river, and it was, they had a lock there. And you had to go in the lock, and then they'd let you down, and to get to the river, And then we got to one place, and I don't know the Selkirk, they call it Selkrik, and there was a Russian Orthodox church there, and it was unbelievably beautiful. I mean, it was right out, nothing nowhere. And there was a Mountie substation there where they'd stop in and check on the church and stuff, But that was it. And then when you got down to where the White River run into the Yukon, there was a kind of split like that, and there was a little group of buildings right there, and they were all on sleds. So because the water would wash away, and he'd have to hook up to them and slide them back, in there. And he had beds in there, was $2 for a bed, and the food that we bought there was cheaper than it was in Whitehorse, from this guy. And they were called Burion's Store, Burins, Burion's Store. It was really, and it was before we got to Dawson City.
And this is in Whitehall, did you say?
It was, Buren's Store was where the White River and the Yukon run together.
What's the name of the town there? Do you remember?
There was no town there.
It was just a store?
Just that store. That was all that was there.
All right.
And what was surprising to me, you only charge you $1 for a bed,
$2.
I mean, $2 for a bed.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was really, really something.
Was this natives that owned this place, or were they white people?
No, it was a white guy.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. And then we got to Dawson City, and we left a boat there. They had a kind of a place that you could tie a boat to, and so we tied our boat up, and we went into town to get a room because we were going to stay for a while, and we couldn't find one at the main hotel we wanted to stay at. They didn't have anything vacant. And so we went down to this other hotel, and it was not in the best part of Dawson City. And they were selling dope wide open on the corner, and marijuana, you could buy anything. And so we finally got a room, and you had to walk down the hall to the bathroom. It was at the other end of the hall from where your rooms were. So we put our stuff up, and so we went back to check on the boat, and we had a dog with us named Irvin, and he was a golden retriever, but he was big. He must have weighed 130 pounds, We'd have to get him up in the front of the boat before we could get on plane, But so we left Irvin down there to guard the boat, Well, we got back to our boat and it was gone. And
And what about the dog? He was gone too?
The dog was still there. And so there was a drunk over there. So went over there and asked the drunk if he'd seen our boat anywhere. He said, yeah, he said, these Mounties, they got your boat. Now, the Mounties got our boat? He said, yeah, Mounties got your boat. Said they went downriver a little ways and then they came back. But he said at first somebody cut your boat and it went adrift. Was going down to Yukon and this other guy got in his boat and run it down and got it and brought it back.
But before the Mounties took it?
Yeah, before the Mounties took
Okay.
it, brought it back. And so by the time he got back with it, the Mounties were there because somebody had called the Mounties and told them this boat was adrift.
Right.
And so he told the Mounties that the boat was empty. You know, he saw it was drifting down the river.
Yeah.
So it was a girl and a guy, Mountie, good-looking girl. And so they took the boat and then they took off and went back upriver. And so we got back and our boat was gone. Irvin was there, but it was gone.
Well, at least you know the Mounties had it.
And then the Mounties had it.
Wonder why they... Well, you're going to finish the story.
Yeah, I'll finish the story. So we go back in town and said we need somebody to take us on the river to try to find our boat. And there was a guy sitting over there at a table and a little short guy. And he said, what happened? And so we told him, and he said, well, I've got an airplane. He said, I'll fly you, and we'll find it, you know, from there. Says, okay, and come to find out, he was a bull rider from Montana, you know, and that he had moved to Alaska, and everybody said he's the toughest guy in Alaska. You know, he'd fly people up and down the river and fly supplies to them and all that stuff, the gold mines. And so we flying around, and sure enough, there was a boat, and it was in a kind of a boggy area, and the two Mounties were in the boat.
He's in a seaplane, I take it. Seaplane?
No,
pontoons?
It was on skeets, yeah, pontoons.
Well, water?
Yeah,
pontoons for landing on the water?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so we came back, and he took us in a boat then. He had a boat, and he took us down there to where the Mounties were, and they couldn't get the boat to crank. And what happened was they went over to the little island that was right off from where they were, and there was a guy camped over there, and so they got some gasoline from the guy. So they thought they could get enough gas to come back, you know, up the river, and they had sucked mud up in that jet boat, you know,
I know exactly what you're talking about, right.
So they couldn't get it to crank.
Yeah.
And so the guy, we hooked a rope to it, and he took
Now,
us
wait a
back
second.
up to
You're in you went up and rafted right alongside your boat
Yeah,
with the Mounties on board.
yeah, the Mounties are on board, and so we took them back with us and took them back up to the dock.
Stop.
That,
Did you ask them why they took your boat?
Yep, and their answer was that the guy told them that the boat was adrift, and they assumed that we had drowned it, and so they were going to look for us.
I see. Okay, gotcha.
I think he just wanted to take that good-looking girl for a ride. That's what I think, but but she was a pretty girl. But anyway, we went back and we went to the Mountie headquarters and told them what happened, and the guy said, we'll have it fixed. So the Mounties, they did. They carried it to this guy, and they fixed it to
Flushed
where
it
we
out.
could
Right.
use it, you know.
Good.
So that was good
Yeah.
in the thing there. But that was a real experience, you know, going down there river for that part.
Bull rider with an airplane. Cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
What else? Let me think. What else? Well, the fact that you're still let's talk about the fact that you're 90 and you're still doing this kind of work.
Okay, yeah. I'm still 90, and they put a new heart valve in me last December. And the doctor said, Henry, whether you know it or not, I just give you 10 more years of life. He said, if you don't get cancer, and right now there's not a cancer anywhere in your body. I knew everything about your body before I did that.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, there's no cancer anywhere in your body.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't get cancer and die or something, have something happen,
Mm-hmm.
he said, you should live another 10 years, and then who knows,
Yeah.
What's going to happen.
And as a result of, since you're still alive, you're not going to stop doing what you've always been doing.
That's right. I'm still entertaining. I'm still doing hours of cowboy poetry. I'm still playing the banjo, and I entertain every night on the cattle drive. I've entertained at every church within 100 miles of where we live here. All the senior groups have suppers every month, and they have me come and entertain them, and they just take up love offerings, and stuff. And I've been doing that now for, 15, 18 years.
Which,
Still doing the cattle drives.
when you're playing the banjo, can you play the banjo in a rocking chair, or do you want a stool to sit on?
No, I usually sit on a stool.
Yeah, right. Okay.
And
well, we'll do that. Let's do that tomorrow morning.
okay.
We'll get the poet and the rock and roll guy out of the way tomorrow.
Yeah, we can. I'll do a couple of my favorite poems that I wrote.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll do a couple of cowboy songs for you.
Mm-hmm.
If that's what
Do you
want.
have? That's part of the story.
Yeah.
And you've any original cowboy songs? I know the poems are original.
I've written. I got a whole book of songs I've written in there over the years, and I know a joke about everything in the world. That's what I've been doing, stand-up comedy. For 30, 40 years. So.
Well, maybe I'll have you do your whole stand-up.
Can I tell you a quick story? Funny story.
Of course.
We had these two little boys were playing on the front porch, and one of them was 6 and the other one was 8. And the oldest one was named Ben, and the youngest one was named Charlie. So they were playing out on the front porch, and Ben says to Charlie, Charlie, I think me and you need to learn how to cuss like the old people do. And little Charlie says, yeah, that ought to be fun. So he said, well, what kind of cuss words can we use? Ben says, well, I'm going to use the word hell. Charlie says, yeah, that's a good one. He said, what can I use? Ben says, well, why don't you use the word ass? He said, ass? You mean ass?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. He said, yeah, I like that word. I said, that's good, So the next morning they came down for breakfast, and his mother said, Ben, what would you like for breakfast? He said, oh, hell, Ma, just give me a bowl of them old Cheerios. Boy, she took him in the bathroom and beat his tail. Said, now you stay in there till you learn how to talk nice. She come back out and she said, Charlie, what would you like for breakfast? He said, you can bet your fat ass it ain't gonna be Cheerios.
That's a good one. Oh boy.
One of my other favorite stories that I tell, and the nursing home people, they really like this one, is that when me and my little cousin Hubie, we were always into trouble when we were little. And Hubie lived with us, and his folks had died, and so we was always into something. So my mother decided that she had to do something to get us straightened out when we lived kind of quartered across the street from the church.
Mm-hmm.
So she went over there and told the preacher, said, look, says, we got to do something about Henry and Hubie. Said, they're always into trouble. Said, could you talk to them? And the preacher says, of course. Miss Barron said, just send them over here and I'll talk to them. Send the youngest one over first. I don't want them together. She said, okay, so she sent Hubie over there. And we carried Hubie in, set him down in the pew and said, Hubie, you know where you are? Yes, sir. He says, where are you? He I'm in church. He said, the preacher said, yeah, that's right. He said, where do you think God is? Hubie didn't say nothing. He said, Hubie, where's God? Hubie still didn't do it. He said, Hubie, I'm going to ask you one more time. Where is God? Boy, Hubie jumped up out of the church and ran outside and ran across the road and ran upstairs where I was at. And he said, Henry, we in trouble. I said, what in the world's the matter, Hubie? He said, God's missing and they think we had something to do with it.
That's great.
Yeah, Hubie was out in the front yard and there was a new guy moved in across
That's a true
the
story.
street. And this new guy moved in across the street over there, and it was in the middle of summer, and it was hot, and he was pulling on his lawnmower work. He pulled on it for about 30 minutes, and he wouldn't crank. Hubie was on the other side of the road watching. Hubie goes over and he says, excuse me, sir, but are you having a problem with that lawnmower? And the guy said, son, I sure am. Said, I've been putting on this thing, I don't know, maybe 30 minutes. I can't get it to crank. Hubie says, well, my daddy says that if a lawnmower won't crank, you gotta cuss it. And the guy says, I'm sorry, son, but I can't do that. Hubie said, why not? He said, son, I'm a preacher. He said, I forgot how to cuss 20 years ago. Hubie said, keep pulling, it'll come back to you.